The light from Elena's office was the only one still glowing on the 37th floor of the Meridian Technologies building. The clock on her wall showed 11:28 p.m., but time had lost meaning hours ago. Outside her floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled like a jewelry box of lights against the night sky. Elena rubbed her tired eyes and leaned back in her leather chair, the weight of the day's meeting sitting heavy on her shoulders. The board hadn't liked her proposal for expanding into Southeast Asian markets. They called it premature and overly ambitious, in words that made her blood boil. She had data, projections, and a solid strategy, but they still saw her as the young upstart who had climbed too far, too fast. 14 years as CEO, and they still treat me like I'm fresh out of business school, she muttered, shutting down her laptop with more force than necessary. Elena slipped off her heels under her desk and flexed her toes. She needed to clear her head before going home. Otherwise, she'd just lie awake replaying the meeting over and over. The building was empty except for security downstairs and probably the night cleaning crew. Perfect for what she needed, a walk to shake off the frustration. The executive floor was silent as her bare feet padded across the plush carpet. She'd designed this space herself when they'd moved headquarters 5 years ago. Clean lines, muted colors, and just enough artistic touches to seem cultured without being distracting. The crown jewel was the grand piano in the reception area, a beautiful Steinway that gleamed black and perfect in the dim light. It was purely decorative. None of the executives played, as far as she knew, but clients loved it. It spoke of success, refinement, and the kind of old money that Elena had fought her whole life to be associated with. The piano represented everything she'd clawed her way up to achieve. Elena ran her fingers along its smooth surface, remembering the day it had been delivered. The movers had treated it like a sleeping giant, careful and reverent. She'd paid extra to have it tuned monthly, though no one had ever played it beyond a curious plink of keys from visitors' children. "What a waste," she whispered, lifting the cover to reveal the pristine keys beneath. The ivory and black seemed to glow in the low light, tempting her. Elena pressed one key and a clear note rang through the empty space. She smiled despite herself. As a child, she'd begged her mother for piano lessons, enchanted by a concert pianist she'd seen on TV. But there had been no money for such luxuries in their small apartment, where the rent was always late and dinner was often just beans and rice. Now she owned a $150,000 piano that no one played. Life had a strange way of granting wishes. From somewhere behind her came the soft squeak of wheels. Elena turned to see a cleaning cart rolling into view, pushed by a man in a gray uniform. He froze when he saw her, clearly surprised to find someone still in the office. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quickly, already beginning to back away. "I can come back later." "No, it's fine," Elena said, waving him in. "I was just leaving anyway." But she didn't move from the piano, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. The janitor nodded and began to work, emptying trash bins with practiced efficiency. He kept his head down, trying to be invisible as most service workers learn to do around executives. Elena had been that invisible once, waiting tables to put herself through college. She'd sworn then that someday people would see her, really see her. "Do you play?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. The man looked up, confusion crossing his face before he realized she meant the piano. He shook his head. "No, ma'am." Elena nodded, turning back to the instrument. "Neither do I, not really." She pressed another key, then another, a discordant little melody with no rhythm or skill. "My mother couldn't afford lessons." She didn't know why she was telling this to a cleaning man at nearly midnight. Perhaps it was the failure of the board meeting, or maybe just the late hour breaking down her usual walls. "My father wanted to be a musician," the janitor offered unexpectedly. His voice was soft but clear, with the gentle lilt of an accent Elena couldn't quite place. He loved Chopin especially. "Chopin," Elena repeated, the name stirring distant memories of a music appreciation class she'd taken to fulfill an arts requirement in college. "The sad one, right? All those complicated melodies?" The man smiled slightly. "Yes, beautiful but difficult to play well." Elena looked down at the keys beneath her untrained fingers. Just another skill she'd never had time to master, another box she couldn't check. She was brilliant at business strategy, could read a financial statement like some people read novels, and had built Meridian from a struggling tech firm into an industry leader. But she couldn't play a simple tune on this showpiece in her own office. The thought irritated her suddenly. This piano, like so many things in her life, was all for show, a prop in the carefully constructed image of success she'd built. And now, after the board meeting, even that image felt like it was cracking. "I'd marry anyone who could play Chopin on this piano," she said impulsively, a bitter laugh escaping her throat. "Seriously, walk in here and play Ballade No. 1 in G minor from memory, and I'll propose on the spot." The words hung in the air, too loud in the quiet space. Elena felt foolish immediately. She was overtired and oversharing with a member of the cleaning staff who probably thought she was crazy now. "Anyway," she said briskly, closing the piano cover with a definitive click, "I should head home. Please continue with your work." She turned away from the janitor, whose name badge she now noticed read Miguel, and walked quickly back to her office to gather her things. The momentary vulnerability felt like weakness, something she couldn't afford, especially after today's setback. Elena slipped her heels back on, grabbed her designer bag, and headed for the elevator without looking back at the reception area. As the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of Miguel standing by the piano, looking at it thoughtfully. The ride down to the parking garage gave her time to compose herself. By tomorrow, she'd have a new strategy to win over the board. She'd work through the night if necessary. Elena Reyes didn't stay down for long. It wasn't in her nature. As she slid into the leather seat of her Mercedes, she was already making mental notes for a revised presentation. The strange moment at the piano was forgotten by the time she pulled out of the garage and into the night traffic, but Miguel Alvarez hadn't forgotten. After Elena left, he stood in the silent reception area, looking at the gleaming Steinway. His hands, rough from years of manual labor, flexed unconsciously at his sides. There had been a time when those same hands had danced across piano keys with skill that made his teachers predict a bright future. Miguel had been 16 when he won his first major competition in Lima. The newspapers had called him Peru's rising star, a young genius with extraordinary emotional depth in his playing. His father, a carpenter who loved classical music more than anything, had wept with pride. Then came the accident at his father's workshop, the mounting medical bills, and the difficult choice to set aside music for more practical concerns. By 20, Miguel was working construction instead of attending the conservatory that had offered him a partial scholarship. By 25, he had moved to America to send more money home. And now, at 42, he cleaned offices at night while his mother and sisters lived comfortably in the home his earnings had bought them in Lima. He hadn't touched a real piano in years. The small electronic keyboard in his apartment was nothing like this magnificent instrument before him. Sometimes weeks passed without him playing at all, the demands of work and exhaustion stealing away even that small pleasure. But the CEO's careless words had struck a chord in him that wouldn't stop vibrating. Not because he had any interest in marriage to this driven, complicated woman. No, it was something else entirely. The chance to be seen as more than just the man who emptied her trash. Miguel looked at his watch. He still had 4 more floors to clean before his shift ended at 3 a.m. But tomorrow was his day off. He ran a gentle finger along the closed cover of the piano, a plan forming in his mind, not for romance or advantage, but for something he hadn't felt in a very long time. The simple dignity of being recognized for his true gifts rather than just his labor. Ballade No. 1 in G minor, he whispered to himself, closing his eyes briefly. He could still see the sheet music in his mind, could feel the challenging passages under his fingers. It had been his father's favorite piece, the one he'd played at his last recital before everything changed. Miguel pushed his cart toward the elevator, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The CEO had no idea who she had challenged with her careless promise. But she would find out soon enough. Behind him, the piano waited in the darkness, silent for now, but perhaps not for much longer. The next morning hit Elena like a truck. Her alarm blared at 5:30 a.m. after she'd finally fallen asleep around 2, her mind still churning with revised strategies for the board. She dragged herself to the shower, letting the hot water wash away the cobwebs of too little sleep. By 6:15, she was dressed in a navy suit that cost more than some people's monthly rent, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that gave no hint of her exhaustion. The coffee maker in her kitchen hummed to life, filling the empty apartment with the rich scent of espresso. Elena lived alone in a sleek penthouse that showcased stunning views but held few personal touches. No family photos graced the walls, no mementos cluttered the surfaces. Her life was contained in her calendar and her work files. Sometimes, on rare quiet evenings, this bothered her. Most days she was too busy to notice. She gulped down her coffee while reviewing her notes for the day. The revised proposal for the Asian expansion would have to wait. Today's focus was the quarterly review and a meeting with potential investors from Dubai. No time to dwell on yesterday's failure. By 7:30, she was in her car, navigating through traffic with the practiced efficiency that marked everything she did. The radio played classical music, a habit she'd adopted years ago after reading that it improved cognitive function. Today it was something with piano, the notes rippling like water. It reminded her of her odd moment at the piano last night, and the even stranger comment she'd made to the janitor. "God, what was I thinking?" she muttered, changing the station to news. The last thing she needed was some cleaning staff gossiping about the CEO's midnight meltdown. Across town, in a small one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and stubborn water stains on the ceiling, Miguel Alvarez was also awake early despite it being his day off. He sat at his kitchen table, a cup of black coffee cooling beside him as his fingers danced over a worn electronic keyboard. It wasn't much, just a basic model he'd bought secondhand years ago. The keys were plastic instead of ivory, the sound tinny compared to a real piano, but it was enough to help him remember. Miguel closed his eyes as his fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The familiar melody transported him back to his youth, to the small music school in Lima, where his teacher had first introduced him to Chopin's work. "This piece tells a story without words," the old man had told him. "It begins gently like a question, then builds into something powerful, something that cannot be contained." Just like life itself, Miguel thought now as his fingers stumbled over a difficult passage. He grimaced and started again. This section had always given him trouble, the rapid change of tempo, the complexity of emotion. He'd need more practice before attempting it on a real piano, especially one that cost more than he earned in several years. Was he really considering this? Playing for the CEO, taking her careless words as a challenge? It wasn't about her offer of marriage. That was clearly just a frustrated joke. No, it was about something more important. Being seen, truly seen, beyond the gray uniform and the job title. Miguel flexed his hands, looking down at the calluses and small scars from years of manual labor. Once, his hands had been his greatest asset, capable of creating beauty that moved people to tears. Now they were just tools for scrubbing floors and emptying trash. He returned to the keyboard, working through the piece again, and again, and again. Hours slipped by as he reacquainted himself with the music that had once been as familiar as breathing. By afternoon, his fingers ached, and his back was stiff from sitting hunched over the small keyboard. But something had awakened inside him, a spark that had been dormant for too long. Miguel made himself a simple lunch of rice and beans, his mind still playing through the difficult passages of the ballade. He had tonight off too. The office building would be mostly empty on a Friday night. But security would be there, and the cameras, Miguel chewed thoughtfully. He would need to be careful. Getting fired for unauthorized use of the CEO's piano wasn't part of his plan. Back at Meridian Technologies, Elena was finishing up her meeting with the Dubai investors. It had gone well, better than expected. They seemed impressed with her vision and the company's growth trajectory. As she walked them to the elevator, one of them commented on the grand piano in the reception area. "Do you play, Ms. Reyes?" he asked. "Unfortunately not," she replied with a practiced smile. "It's more of an aesthetic choice for the space." "Ah, what a shame," he said. "My wife is a concert pianist. She would say a piano should be played, not just admired." Elena nodded politely, but the comment stung more than it should have. After the investors left, she found herself walking back to the piano, looking at it with fresh eyes. It really was beautiful, and completely wasted. "A piano should be played, not just admired," she repeated softly, running her finger along the edge. Like so many things in her life, it was all for show. Sometimes she wondered if she herself was just for show too. The female CEO, the success story, the woman who had it all. Except she didn't, not really. She had a company and an empty apartment and a piano no one played. The thought followed her through the rest of the day, a persistent itch she couldn't quite scratch. By 10 p.m., the office had emptied out except for a few workaholics and the night security guard at the front desk downstairs. Elena should have gone home hours ago. But the quiet of the evening hours was when she did her best thinking. Tonight, though, she found it hard to focus. She kept thinking about the piano, and the janitor with his soft voice talking about Chopin, and her own ridiculous comment about marrying anyone who could play that piece. With a sigh, she shut down her computer and gathered her things. She needed a good night's sleep. Everything would look clearer in the morning. As she walked through the reception area on her way to the elevator, she paused by the piano. On impulse, she lifted the cover and pressed a few keys, the discordant notes echoing in the empty space. She shook her head at herself and continued to the elevator, unaware that tomorrow would bring a surprise that would shake her carefully constructed world. Across town, Miguel had made his decision. He showered and dressed with care, choosing his best clothes, dark pants and a button-down shirt that he usually saved for church. He studied himself in the small bathroom mirror, noting the silver threading through his black hair at the temples, the lines etched around his eyes. He was no longer the young prodigy with dreams of concert halls, but maybe he still had something worth sharing. He arrived at the Meridian building just after midnight. The night security guard, Hector, was at the desk reading something on his phone. "Evening, Miguel," Hector said, looking up with surprise. "Thought you had tonight off." "I do," Miguel replied. "I just forgot something in the supply closet yesterday. Won't take long to grab it?" Hector nodded, returning to his phone. He and Miguel had worked the same shifts for years. There was trust there. Miguel took the elevator up to the 37th floor, his heart pounding harder with each floor the elevator climbed. This was crazy. He could lose his job. And for what? To prove something to a woman who had probably already forgotten her careless words? But as he stepped onto the executive floor and saw the piano waiting in the dim light, he knew he had to do this. Not for her, but for himself. For the boy who had once dreamed of music as his life's purpose. For his father, who had sacrificed to give him lessons. For all the years that his talent had lain dormant while he scrubbed floors and collected trash. Miguel approached the piano with reverence, setting down the small bag he'd brought with him. From it, he took a cloth and carefully dusted the already gleaming surface of the instrument. Then he opened the cover, revealing the perfect white and black keys beneath. He sat down on the bench, adjusting it to the right height. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. It had been so long since he'd touched a real piano, let alone one of this quality. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes of the ballade filled the empty space, hesitant at first, like a question asked in the dark. But as Miguel continued, his confidence grew. His fingers remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The joy of creating something beautiful. The conversation between himself and the composer across centuries. The piece built in intensity, telling its wordless story through his hands. Miguel was lost in it now, eyes closed, body swaying slightly with the emotion of the music. He forgot where he was, forgot his fears, forgot everything except the connection between his soul and the sounds he was creating. He didn't hear the elevator doors open, didn't notice the figure standing frozen at the edge of the reception area. Briefcase dropped forgotten to the floor. Elena Reyes had returned to the office at 1 a.m., unable to sleep, planning to work through the night on a new approach for the board. Instead, she found herself transfixed by the sight of the night janitor transformed, creating magic at her showpiece piano. And as the final notes of Chopin's masterpiece faded into silence, two worlds that had seemed impossibly distant suddenly collided. The last notes hung in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Miguel sat still at the piano, his eyes closed, hands resting lightly on the keys. For a moment, he was somewhere else entirely, back in the small concert hall in Lima where he'd given his final performance. Before putting his dreams aside, the sound of something dropping brought him crashing back to reality. His eyes flew open and he turned to see Elena Reyes standing at the edge of the reception area, her briefcase on the floor beside her. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse instead of her usual power suit, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, more vulnerable somehow, and completely stunned. Miguel stood quickly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Ms. Reyes, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "That was Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't a question. Miguel nodded, unable to read her expression in the dim light. Yes. You played it perfectly. She took a step forward, then another, moving as if in a dream. Where did you learn to play like that? The question wasn't what he'd expected. Not anger at his presumption, not embarrassment about her careless promise the night before. Just genuine curiosity, maybe even awe. I studied at the National Conservatory of Music in Lima, he said, straightening his shoulders slightly. A long time ago. Peru, she said, nodding as if something had clicked into place. That's the accent I couldn't place. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Miguel's hands, which had moved with such confidence over the piano keys moments ago, now fidgeted at his sides. Why are you working as a janitor? Elena asked finally, the blunt question so characteristic of her that Miguel almost smiled. Life took a different turn, he said simply. My father was injured. The family needed money, not music. Elena's eyes went to the piano, then back to Miguel. You heard what I said yesterday. It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. I did. Is that why you came here tonight? To play for me? There was a hint of something in her voice. Embarrassment, perhaps, or discomfort at being caught in her impulsive promise. No, Miguel said, surprising himself with his honesty. I came to play for me. Their eyes met across the space between them, and something shifted in the air. A recognition, perhaps, of something they shared despite their different worlds. Elena moved to the piano, running her fingers along its glossy surface as she had the night before. I never expected anyone to take my ridiculous comments seriously. I didn't, Miguel said. I mean, I don't expect. He stopped, feeling the heat rise to his face. That's not why I played. Then why? She turned to face him fully, her gaze direct and uncompromising. The CEO reasserting herself even in jeans and with mussed hair. Miguel considered the question. He could give her the safe answer, something about missing music and the temptation of a beautiful instrument. But the night felt like a time for truths. Because you only see the janitor, he said quietly. The man who empties your trash and cleans your floors. I wanted just once to be seen for what I used to be, for what I still am underneath this uniform. The words hung between them, too honest, too raw. Miguel wished he could take them back, stuff them away where they belonged. Elena's expression changed, softened perhaps, though it was hard to tell in the shadows. You're right, she said after a long pause. I never really looked at you. At any of the cleaning staff or the security guards or the cafeteria workers? She shook her head slightly. That makes me a terrible person, doesn't it? No, Miguel said. It makes you human. We all have blind spots. Some bigger than others, she said with a wry smile. Then, surprising him, she gestured to the piano bench. Will you play something else? Miguel hesitated, still worried about his job. About crossing invisible lines, please, she added, and there was something genuine in her voice that made it impossible to refuse. He sat back down at the piano, considering what to play. After a moment, his hands found the keys and the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room. It was a gentler piece than the Chopin, perfect for the strange intimacy of the moment. Elena moved closer, leaning against the piano as she watched his hands. The music wrapped around them both, creating a bubble separate from their normal lives. Not CEO and janitor, just two people sharing something beautiful in the middle of the night. When the final chord faded away, Elena spoke again. How long have you worked here, Miguel? 7 years, he answered. 7 years, she repeated, shaking her head slightly. And I never knew, she paused. What else don't I know about the people who work for me? Miguel had no answer for that. My mother cleaned houses, Elena said suddenly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Rich people's houses where they had pianos no one played and artwork no one looked at. She would come home with stories about the things they took for granted. She looked around the reception area, at the expensive furnishings, the artwork on the walls. I swore I'd never be like them. And yet here I am. Miguel didn't know what to say to that. This wasn't a conversation he'd ever imagined having with Elena Reyes, the intimidating CEO who rarely even made eye contact with the cleaning staff. I should go, he said, standing up. I don't want to get in trouble with security. You won't, she assured him. I'll talk to them. Miguel nodded, suddenly eager to escape the strange intimacy that had developed between them. He'd achieved what he came for. He'd played on the magnificent piano, had been seen, truly seen, by the woman who signed his paychecks. It should have felt like a victory, but instead he felt oddly exposed. "Thank you for playing," Elena said as he moved toward the elevator. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" he asked, curious despite himself. She seemed to consider her answer carefully. "That there's more to life than balance sheets and board meetings." She smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "And that I should never make reckless promises, even when I think no one's listening." Miguel felt a flush creep up his neck. "About that, I know you didn't come here to collect on a silly comment," she said, cutting him off. "But it does make me wonder what other talents are hiding in plain sight around here." Before Miguel could respond, the elevator doors opened behind him. He stepped inside, still feeling off balance from the entire encounter. "Good night." "Miguel," Elena said as the doors began to close. "Good night, Ms. Reyes," he replied. "Elena," she corrected, just before the doors shut completely. Miguel rode down to the lobby in silence, his mind replaying everything that had just happened. Hector looked up from the security desk as he crossed the lobby. "Find what you needed?" the guard asked. Miguel thought about the question. Had he found what he needed? He wasn't sure. He'd wanted to be seen, and he had been. But now what? "Yes," he said simply. "Thanks, Hector." Outside, the city was quiet, the streets nearly empty. Miguel walked to the bus stop, the cool night air clearing his head. He'd probably overstepped tonight. Tomorrow, in the harsh light of day, Elena might feel differently about the janitor who had presumed to play her piano. But for now, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years: pride in who he truly was. Back in her office, Elena sat at her desk, the work she'd come to do completely forgotten. She kept hearing the music, seeing the transformation in Miguel as he played, how his entire being had seemed to change, to glow with a hidden light. She opened her laptop and typed his name into the search bar: Miguel Alvarez, pianist, Peru. The results surprised her. News articles from 20 years ago praising a young prodigy from Lima, a few grainy videos from recitals, a feature in a music magazine about promising talents from South America. One video caught her eye, a teenage Miguel playing the very same Chopin piece she'd heard tonight. She clicked on it, watching as a young boy with the same serious eyes and determined expression brought the complex music to life. The video quality was poor, but the talent was unmistakable. What had happened to that boy? How had he gone from concert halls to cleaning floors? She thought about his simple explanation. "My father was injured. The family needed money, not music." How many dreams were set aside every day for such practical concerns? And what responsibility did she have, as someone with power and resources, to notice these things, to see people for who they really were, not just the functions they performed? Elena closed the laptop, feeling unsettled in a way she couldn't quite define. She'd built her life around being seen, fighting to be noticed in boardrooms full of men, proving herself over and over until no one could deny her place at the table. But how much had she missed by not seeing others? Tomorrow would be complicated. The lines between CEO and employee had blurred tonight in a way that couldn't be easily redrawn. But as she gathered her things to finally head home, Elena found herself looking forward to the complications, to the disruption in her orderly world. Sometimes, she thought, the most beautiful music comes from unexpected places. Morning light streamed through the windows of Elena's office as she reviewed the quarterly reports, or tried to. The numbers kept blurring before her eyes, her mind wandering back to last night's strange encounter. She'd barely slept, replaying the music and the conversation over and over. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Her assistant, Lucia, poked her head in. "Your 9:30 is here," she said. "The department heads are gathering in the conference room." Elena nodded, closing the folder in front of her. "Thank you. I'll be right there." As Lucia turned to leave, Elena called her back. "Wait, I have a question." "Yes?" Lucia looked surprised. Elena rarely engaged in small talk. "Do you know Miguel? From the night cleaning staff?" Lucia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Tall guy, gray at the temples? Keeps to himself?" "That's him. Not really. I mean, he's always polite when I work late." "Why do you ask?" Elena hesitated. "Just curious. He's worked here 7 years, and I realized I know nothing about him." Lucia studied her boss with new interest. "He brings homemade food sometimes and shares it with security. Really good empanadas." She paused. "Is everything okay?" "Fine," Elena said quickly. "Just trying to Know my employees better. The word sounded stiff even to her own ears. Lucia nodded, clearly confused but knowing better than to press. I'll tell everyone you're on your way. Alone again, Elena stood and smoothed her skirt, gathering her professional persona around her like armor. Whatever had happened last night, whatever strange connection had formed over piano music in the dark, it didn't belong in the daylight world of business meetings and bottom lines. She strode down the hallway toward the conference room, her heels clicking authoritatively on the polished floor. As she passed the reception area, her eyes went to the piano. It looked the same as always, sleek, black, untouched. But now she knew its voice, knew what it could become in the right hands. The meeting dragged, department heads delivering updates that should have held her full attention, but instead washed over her like background noise. When asked for her input, she gave answers that must have made sense because no one looked at her strangely. But afterward, she couldn't recall what she'd said. By afternoon, she'd made a decision. She called the HR department. I need the personnel file for Miguel Alvarez, she told the director. Night cleaning staff. Is there a problem? The woman asked cautiously. No, it's for a special project I'm considering. It wasn't entirely a lie. An idea had been forming since dawn, nebulous but persistent. The file arrived an hour later. Elena closed her office door before opening it, feeling oddly like she was invading Miguel's privacy, despite her right as CEO to review employee records. The file was thin. Application from 7 years ago, listing previous jobs, all manual labor. Nothing about music education or piano competitions. Regular performance reviews, all satisfactory but generic. Current address in a part of town Elena knew was modest at best. Emergency contact Pilar Alvarez with a Peruvian phone number. His mother, Elena guessed. A note caught her eye. Miguel had twice declined promotions to supervisor positions, once 3 years ago and again last year. The HR notation simply read, prefers current shift for family reasons. Family reasons. Elena wondered what that meant. A second job? Caregiving responsibilities? Or was it simply that supervisors worked days and Miguel needed nights free for something else? She closed the file, feeling no closer to understanding the man who had played Chopin with such passion in her reception area. But one thing was clear. There was more to Miguel Alvarez than his job title suggested. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and calls. As evening approached, Elena found herself lingering later than usual, half hoping to catch Miguel arriving for his shift. But by the time the cleaning crew appeared at 10 p.m., she had convinced herself to leave. Whatever she wanted to say to him needed more thought. On her way out, she nodded to the crew supervisor, a heavyset woman named Gloria, who had worked at Meridian almost as long as Elena. Evening. Ms. Reyes, Gloria said, surprised at the acknowledgement. Usually the CEO breezed past them as if they were invisible. Gloria, Elena replied, then hesitated. Is Miguel working tonight? Gloria's eyebrows shot up. No, he's off until Monday. Is there a problem? No problem, Elena said quickly. I just wanted to ask him something. Gloria's expression turned wary. He's a good worker, Ms. Reyes, whatever it is. It's nothing bad, Elena assured her. Actually, it's about the piano. Did you know he plays? Gloria's face relaxed into a smile. Oh, that. Yes, he's amazing, isn't he? He plays at church sometimes. Such a waste, that talent. Elena felt a strange mix of emotions. So others knew about Miguel's gift. She hadn't discovered some great secret, and yet she alone had heard him play Chopin in the middle of the night, had seen him transformed from janitor to artist in the space of a few minutes. Yes, she agreed. A waste. The weekend stretched before her, empty as usual except for the work she'd bring home. But for once, Elena felt restless at the prospect. Instead of driving straight to her apartment, she found herself taking a detour, heading toward a part of town she rarely visited. The address from Miguel's file led her to a modest apartment building with a small grocery store on the ground floor. Elena parked across the street, suddenly unsure what she was doing there. This was crossing a line, showing up uninvited at an employee's home. She was about to drive away when she spotted him. Miguel was exiting the grocery store carrying a small bag in one hand. He wore jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking younger somehow without his work uniform. Before she could think better of it, Elena got out of her car and crossed the street. Miguel, she called. He turned, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to recognition to something like alarm. Ms. Reyes? Elena, she corrected, suddenly feeling foolish. I'm sorry to show up like this. I was just, what exactly? Stalking her employees? Having a midlife crisis? I wanted to talk to you, and Gloria said you weren't working until Monday. Miguel glanced around as if checking for witnesses to this bizarre encounter. Is something wrong? No, she said quickly. She took a deep breath. I had an idea I wanted to discuss with you. About music, his expression shifted again. Curiosity replacing wariness. Music? Yes, but not here on the street. Could we? She gestured vaguely toward the building. Miguel hesitated, then nodded. My apartment is small, but yes, if you want to talk. The building's hallway was clean but worn, the elevator out of order according to a handwritten sign. They climbed 3 flights of stairs in awkward silence. Miguel's apartment was indeed small, just one main room serving as living room and kitchen, with 2 doors that presumably led to a bedroom and bathroom. But it was tidy and surprisingly bright, with potted plants on the windowsill and a few framed photos on the walls. In the corner stood the electronic keyboard Elena had glimpsed in the online videos. Would you like some coffee? Miguel asked formally, setting down his grocery bag. No, thank you, Elena said, suddenly aware of how out of place she must look in her designer clothes and heels. She took a deep breath. I'll get right to the point. I've been thinking about your talent, about how it's wasted cleaning offices at night. Miguel's expression hardened slightly. My job isn't glamorous, but it's honest work. It pays my bills and helps my family. There's no shame in it. No, of course not, Elena said quickly. That's not what I meant. She paused, trying to find the right words. You have an extraordinary gift. And gifts like that shouldn't be hidden. Miguel gestured to the keyboard. I still play. Not professionally, but music remains part of my life. But it could be more, Elena said, the idea that had been forming since dawn finally taking clear shape. Meridian has a community outreach program. We fund arts education in local schools, sponsor cultural events. What if we created a position for you? Teaching music, organizing concerts, being the face of our arts initiative. Miguel stared at her, clearly taken aback. You want to hire me as what, a music teacher? More than that, Elena said, warming to the idea as she spoke. A cultural ambassador. Someone who shows that Meridian values more than just profit margins and market share. Someone who brings beauty into places that need it. Because I played Chopin on your piano? Miguel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Elena felt her cheeks warm. Because you showed me something I'd forgotten. That there's value in things that can't be measured on a spreadsheet. And because you were right about me not seeing the people who work for me. Not really. Miguel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to read her true intentions. This is a very unusual proposal, Ms. Elena, especially coming to my home on a Friday night to discuss it. Elena felt foolish again. I'm not handling this well, am I? I should have waited, made an appointment, been more professional. To her surprise, Miguel smiled. Perhaps, but then it wouldn't be so interesting a story. Their eyes met, and Elena felt something shift between them again. Not romance exactly, but a connection, a recognition of something shared. Why did you really come here tonight? Miguel asked quietly. Elena considered lying, considered giving him the polished corporate answer about talent recruitment and brand enhancement. But the night called for honesty, just as it had in the reception area with the piano. Because I can't stop thinking about the music, she said simply, and about what else I might be missing by not really looking at the world around me. Miguel nodded slowly. That's a good reason. He gestured to the small couch. Sit, please. And I think I will make that coffee after all. We have a lot to talk about. As Elena sat in Miguel's modest apartment, surrounded by the evidence of a life so different from her own, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of stepping into unknown territory, of discovering something new. Whatever came next, whether Miguel accepted her offer or not, something had fundamentally changed. The barriers between CEO and janitor, between worlds that were never meant to intersect, had already begun to crumble. And in their place, something new and unexpected was taking root. 6 months later, the Meridian Technologies lobby looked completely different. The grand piano still occupied its place of honor, but now it was surrounded by chairs arranged in a semicircle. Colorful artwork hung on walls that had once displayed only corporate awards. Most noticeably, the space was filled with people. Employees from all departments mingled together, coffee cups in hand, waiting for something to begin. Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, watching with a mix of pride and amazement. When she'd first proposed the Friday afternoon concert series, the board had been skeptical. A waste of productive hours, one member had called it. But she'd persisted, presenting research on how creative breaks improved productivity and company loyalty. In the end, they'd agreed to a 3-month trial. That had been 3 months ago. Today would determine whether the program continued. Her eyes scanned the room until she found Miguel, setting up sheet music at the piano. He looked different now, still the same thoughtful eyes and gentle manner, but his posture had changed. He stood straighter, moved with more confidence. The gray uniform was gone, replaced by casual but professional attire that suited his new role as Meridian's Director of Arts and Community Engagement. It hadn't been an easy transition. Some executives had questioned Elena's decision to promote a janitor to a director-level position. There had been whispers of favoritism, even rumors of a romantic relationship between them, none of which were true. Their connection was something different, harder to define. Miguel had had his own doubts. "I'm not sure I belong in boardrooms and business meetings," he'd told her during one of their planning sessions. "Neither did I at first," Elena had replied. "But you bring something different to the table, something we need." Now, watching him prepare for the lunchtime concert, she knew she'd been right. In 6 short months, Miguel had transformed not just his own life, but the culture of Meridian itself. The company's community outreach had expanded beyond token donations to real engagement. Miguel had established music programs in 3 underfunded schools, organized weekend concerts in local parks, and created scholarships for talented kids who couldn't afford lessons. Inside Meridian, he'd discovered hidden talents among the staff: an accountant who played violin, a security guard who sang opera, a programmer with a gift for composition. "We're ready to begin," Miguel announced, and the crowd settled into chairs or found spots to stand along the walls. Every Friday featured a different performer or group, but today was special. Today Miguel himself would play. "Welcome to our 12th Friday concert," he said, his voice warm and assured. "Before we start, I want to thank everyone who has supported this program, especially those who shared their talents over the past 3 months." He paused, his eyes finding Elena's in the crowd.
"And a special thanks to our CEO who had the vision to see that a company isn't just about balance sheets and market shares." A smattering of applause followed, and Elena felt her cheeks warm.
She wasn't used to public praise, especially not the genuine kind that couldn't be dismissed as simple flattery. "Today," Miguel continued, "I'd like to play something that has special meaning. 6 months ago, this piece changed my life in unexpected ways." His fingers settled on the keys, and the opening notes of Chopin's ballade filled the lobby. The crowd fell silent, captivated. Elena felt herself transported back to that night, when she'd stood frozen in shock as the night janitor revealed himself to be something else entirely. She remembered the wonder of that moment, how it had shaken her out of the comfortable routine her life had become. As Miguel played, Elena noticed the faces around her, the accounting team who normally checked their watches impatiently during any break, now completely absorbed. The always harried marketing director with her eyes closed in appreciation. Even the notoriously stern head of legal looking moved by the music. This was what Miguel had brought to Meridian, not just his own talent, but a reminder that behind every job title and role was a whole person with depths and gifts and stories worth knowing. The piece ended to enthusiastic applause, Miguel nodding his thanks as he stood from the piano. But instead of concluding the concert, he turned to the crowd with a smile. "For the second half of today's program, I'd like to introduce a new performer to our series." His eyes found Elena again, someone who has been working very hard over the past few months on a special surprise. Elena felt her heart jump into her throat. This wasn't part of the plan. She shook her head slightly, but Miguel's smile only widened. "Our own CEO, Elena Reyes, has been taking piano lessons in secret," he announced to gasps and murmurs of surprise from the crowd. "And today she's agreed to play for us." Had she agreed to this? Not exactly. But somewhere in the chaos of the past 6 months, between board meetings and strategy sessions and the slow rebuilding of Meridian's corporate culture, Elena had indeed started learning to play. Just basic scales and simple melodies at first, her adult fingers clumsy on the keys that children mastered so easily. Miguel had been her teacher, their lessons squeezed into early mornings before the workday began, or late evenings after everyone had gone home. It had been frustrating, humbling, and oddly freeing, to be a beginner, to be imperfect, to laugh at her own mistakes. "I'm not ready," she'd told Miguel just yesterday when he'd suggested she might play soon. She hadn't imagined soon meant today, but now the crowd was applauding encouragingly, and Miguel was gesturing her toward the piano with that quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. She found herself moving forward, heart pounding. "Just like we practiced," Miguel said softly as she sat on the bench. "You can do this." Elena took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces, her employees, her team, people who had known her only as the driven, sometimes intimidating CEO who demanded excellence and accepted nothing less. What would they think, seeing her stumble through a simple piece that a 10-year-old could probably play better? But then she caught the eye of Lucia, her assistant, who gave her a thumbs up, and Gloria from the cleaning staff, who was beaming with pride, and dozens of others, all looking at her with something she rarely saw directed her way. Not respect born of fear or position, but simple human encouragement. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play Beethoven's Für Elise, just the simplified first section that she'd practiced for weeks. Her fingers trembled slightly and she missed a note early on, but she kept going. The world narrowed to just her hands on the keys, the music flowing imperfectly but earnestly through the lobby. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, far more enthusiastic than her playing deserved, but genuine in its appreciation of her willingness to be vulnerable, to try something new in front of everyone. As the crowd dispersed back to their offices, chatting excitedly about the performance, Miguel approached her at the piano. "That was unfair," Elena said, but she couldn't keep the smile from her face. "I wasn't ready for an audience." "You were perfect," he replied. "Hardly. I made at least 5 mistakes." "Perfect in the ways that matter," Miguel clarified. "You showed them something real, something human." Elena looked around at the lobby, at the space that had once been just a showcase for Meridian's success and was now becoming something more. A gathering place, a community space, a place where music and art mattered alongside profits and productivity. "The board meets this afternoon to decide whether to continue the program," she said. Miguel nodded. "I know. Whatever they decide, these past 3 months have been worth it." "They'll approve it," Elena said with certainty. "I've seen the numbers. Productivity is up 15%. Employee satisfaction surveys show significant improvement. Even our public image has benefited. That piece in the Business Journal last week called Meridian a model for corporate cultural engagement." "Always the CEO," Miguel said with a small smile. "Finding the business case for beauty and connection. Is that so wrong?" she asked. "Not at all. It's who you are. Someone who makes things happen, who finds a way forward." He paused. "It's one of the things I admire most about you." Something in his tone made Elena look up sharply. Over the months of working closely together, they'd developed a friendship unlike any she'd experienced before, built on mutual respect and shared vision rather than similar backgrounds or social connections. But there had always been a careful distance maintained, a professional boundary neither had crossed. "Miguel," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He shook his head slightly. "We should get ready for the board meeting. I've prepared some slides on the community impact numbers that might help our case." The moment passed, and they fell back into their comfortable roles, the CEO and her arts director, preparing to convince a room full of business-minded people that music and connection were worth investing in. 3 hours later, they emerged from the boardroom victorious. The program hadn't just been approved but expanded, with additional budget allocated for community initiatives and a plan to renovate an unused space on the first floor into a proper performance area. "We did it," Elena said, as they walked toward her office, the relief and satisfaction evident in her voice. "You did it," Miguel corrected. "Your vision, your conviction." "I just played the piano." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "No, we did it together. I had ideas, but you brought them to Liffey,